Hello, I'm Maria Ressa. Welcome to Talk Thursday. With us today is Miriam Ferrer. She's a chief government negotiator in the talks with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, the MILF. 8 months after the signing of the framework agreement on the Bangsamoro, talks deadlock over disagreements about wealth and power sharing. Ferrer joins us today to talk about the peace process just 4 days before the government and the MILF resume talks in Kuala Lumpur. Thank you for joining us, Miriam.
Hi, Maria. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to discuss with you where we are at and where we wish to go.
4 days before, and these are make or break talks. Would you characterize them that way?
Well, yes, it's important in the sense that it's this stage that we, both parties, are really eager, anxious maybe even, to come to terms with with the remaining issues pertaining especially to the wealth sharing annex that has indeed taken a long time to process.
Is that what made the talks, the deadlock that happened? What happened there?
I won't exactly call it a deadlock.
Okay.
Maybe it's that kind of a process that took some time to be achieved, and now we're at this stage that we're actually all set to come face to face again. There have actually been communications going on formally and informally through the negotiator, the facilitator, and informally through other channels all this time. So to that extent, it wasn't exactly a deadlock or an impasse. But in any case, the best indication is that we're actually meeting again face to face in formal negotiations to work out, to hammer out the issues that have prevented us in the past from really closing the annex on wealth sharing.
That is wealth sharing. The MILF has stated that they've gone as far as accusing the government of backtracking on the wealth sharing agreement. What exactly happened there?
Well, the process that we have set out is that at the level of the technical working group, which was eventually reduced to a team or
Right.
a pair of people each from each camp, working on the final language, the kind of languaging that will go into the annex.
Okay.
But the agreement has always been that this document is to be brought back, was to be brought back to our principals for their final review. And that's precisely why the two panel chairs did not initial nor sign this document, because that would happen
Yes.
after the final review took place.
And then after the final review, that's when the
We
feedback
sign
came back.
on.
Yes. Okay. So and then something else happened. What in Norway? You were both there for a negotiators panel. It was a peace
That's right.
negotiators. What happened there? Did you? It seemed like you privately you spoke.
Well, it was a very good opportunity because the Malaysian facilitator was invited as well, and Secretary Teresita Quintos Deles was also one of the participants, and she was there also last
Yes.
year. In fact, together with the former chair, Marvic, now Associate Justice Marvic Leonen. But this time, as it happened, Chairman Iqbal, together with two other members of his team, were actually also invited, and that provided us with a very good opportunity, just to come together informally, not at all in the nature of a formal exploratory talks, to sort of catch up on what's going on, maybe sort of get to address some of the feelings that have cropped up over the past few weeks, and then decided on the date for the next round of talks.
So that really was a way to find common ground again.
Yes, it was. It was a good, but we all knew that because we knew that we were both going to Oslo
Yes.
from way back, and it was sort of anticipated that that's part of the step that was to be taken by way of finally setting the next date for the next round.
What's at stake right now at this point in time, at this part of the peace process?
Well, at stake are the three annexes,
Yes.
and I think we're both very conscious that we both, we do want to finish this as soon as possible, that we do need to find compromises to be able to put something on the text and sign on to it. So for this round, certainly our aim is to finish the wealth sharing annex, and power sharing has lots of parts already put on the language, but again, we do need still to go through this and settle some of the issues that continue to have no common resolution yet, or a common language, or even a common substance on which to build the language on. But I think if things go well, we really might be able to also more or less have a good working draft of the power sharing annex with only very few items left for resolution.
And that is on schedule. I mean, because it seems like both sides are sincere in the negotiations. At least both of you have called each other sincere in it, right?
Yes.
Unlike, say, the peace panel on the peace process on the NPAs, CPP, NPA, NDF. You're the first female chief government negotiator. That is, and you're dealing with the MILF, with Islamic culture has a different way of looking at things. How does this affect you? How does this affect the negotiation? How do you feel?
How does it affect me? I've been working with both men and women all my life. To that extent, this is not a new environment, but certainly it requires a different kind of sensitivity and awareness, given precisely the nature of the work. These are negotiations, and what's at stake here is the whole peace and future of the Bangsamoro, Mindanao, and of course the rest of the country. And to that extent, it's a very big responsibility. But certainly, both, I would say that we work very professionally with each other, and since we are both committed to finding good working relations, then whatever difficulties along the way that we have encountered, that's really part of the ups and downs of the process.
I lived for a decade in Indonesia, which has the world's largest Muslim population, and regardless, even in the mosque, there are different areas. The Philippines isn't as stringent on that, but I was surprised when the MILF agreed to having a woman head the peace panel. Was this something, did you find, was this a victory of sorts, or?
Well, yes, it was very important to get their sign on, to have a woman to chair the panel, and indeed it was very encouraging to hear from their end that they would accept a chair from any sex,
right,
or even ethnicity, which was not, of course, supposed to be part of the issue at that time. But we can see, of course, that kind of a growing awareness on everyone's part, that women do have to be part of this process, that they have to play as well as significant roles in making the decisions, as well as implementing everything that has been decided on. And it's a kind of openness and inclusivity that we think that the MILF has already also, brought into their own discourses, into their own thinking. But it's still something that's part of the learning curve of everybody here in these negotiations.
There are women on both sides of the panel. I mean, there are strong women who are also there.
Definitely. They have one female lawyer, Raisa Jajuri, who is somebody who has been taking care of the cases of all their detainees. And, she's not exactly what you might say a token woman in the team. She's definitely somebody that they count on for both political, legal advice. So I think that's a very good thing. And we're very happy that she's part of the two teams working on the different documents.
Is this a cultural difference to Muslim Filipinos? I mean, because if you look at other Islamic cultures around the world, it's many women don't attain this type of leadership position.
No, historically, I think Southeast Asian traditional culture has not really, has been more equitable to that extent. Historically, traditionally, women can own properties, and but in any case, society has indeed, provided, constructed a lot of barriers along the way from different fronts. So in that sense, it's still an uphill struggle for.
It also seems like a very different from the MILF chair. I can't see that kind of openness from former MILF chair Hashim Salamat, for example. Is that a correct? I see him as more of a hardliner than
I wouldn't
than Chairman
know,
Murad.
but certainly he lived in the 1990s
Yes.
when
Reflection.
probably the impetus for greater women's participation had not been front loaded yet. But you can see that it's very much in the foreground now, not only internationally, but also with regards to our own development as a nation,
Yes.
and for that matter, also for the societies inside the Bangsamoro.
While the peace talks, while you guys have been working on the details, what is happening on the ground?
Well, on the ground, we do have our ceasefire mechanism that
Yes.
has made sure that things are going well between the MILF and the government forces. But as you know, that there are many other sources of disruptions or hostilities that have been taking place, and
Yes.
most of these involve other groups and not at all confrontations between the government and the MILF, not at all confrontations between the armed forces
Direct.
of the Philippines
Yes.
or the MILF.
Is it still correct that there have been no direct armed confrontation
Yes.
between the MILF and
Since
the
the
Philippine
signing of the
government?
FAB, we've had zero hostility
Zero.
between the AFP and the MILF. But we do have some incidents that have involved some local commanders of the MILF on the ground and maybe vis-a-vis other officials on the locality. Yeah, so in that sense that these are localized problems, and the good thing is that our ceasefire mechanisms have actually been able to address this and be part of the resolution, and both the breaking up, putting an end to the hostility, and keeping the peace on the ground.
This is a little bit of a push, but how do you distinguish between what is a revolutionary act and what is a criminal act? Like, for example, in the last few days, there have been increased violence in around Zamboanga, and some of the law enforcement have been indirectly saying this is connected to the MILF. It's a part of extortion activities. They haven't actually said that bluntly, but where do you draw the line on
Well,
both?
criminal acts are definitely well defined. Rape is not at all never be justified. Even in terms of political act, it's
Yes.
simply a violation of human rights and can never be politically justified.
But extortion, for example, both the NPA and the MILF, to the varying degrees, use it to raise money.
Well, it's against international humanitarian law, and any responsible armed group will know that it cannot tolerate, say, indiscriminate acts of violence that affect civilian population, and that will make it criminal acts, certainly. But sometimes it's a difficult thing to really identify
Yes.
which armed group or who are the actual perpetrators of very specific events, like some of the grenade throwing incidents that we've had recently in
Yes.
parts of Cotabato and so on. There are just so many
Yes.
other sources of violence that exist in these areas today, and that's really part of the problem that we're trying to address, that we actually come to terms, build that kind of partnership with the MILF, so that they become partners in also the peace, in putting, really laying the foundation for peace and order in these societies.
What are other sticking points now where you are in the talks?
Let's see. Power sharing, we know that we do have a long list there of items that will have to go into the draft, and there are some items that we haven't really come to terms with. I think we've said this in the past. Transportation is one of these. Transportation covers the whole gamut of air, land, and transportation facilities,
Yes.
licensing, registration, and so on. And we've gone through the process of actually inviting experts to join us in our negotiations to better come to grips with all the different dimensions. But we still have to find the proper allocation of powers there, and then trying to find a way to put it in the annex. That's the language, the substance and the language I mean,
one of the sticking points in talks in the past was actually, of course, after having gone through the MNLF peace agreement, the weapons. And what do you do with troops?
Right. I think better than the past agreement, we will have very clear components there that will address what we have called decommissioning of combatants and weapons until these are put beyond use, and all within the framework of normalization, meaning this decommissioning will be accompanied by complementary components. Like we fully understand the MLF when they say that they cannot simply decommission their arms and they would still have all of these private armed groups,
Right.
other all kinds of other groups
Yes.
that are holding on to their guns, and we know that that kind of situation will create insecurity, so that in the sense that kind of programming would have to be accompanied by other security components addressing the other dimensions.
What about the reality of it? Like, and again, I remember when I was looking at the MILF and the government. Though in the past, the MILF was the de facto authority who dispensed peace and order in parts of the region where the government, the national police or the armed forces of the Philippines just weren't there or weren't trusted. Do those situations still exist, and how do you handle things like that? Is the government looking
Yes,
at it with
there's
clarity?
a coordination system between the our AFP troops and the MILF forces on the ground, and that's largely done through our ceasefire committee. And we do have this other group known as the Ad Hoc Joint Action Group that coordinates when law enforcement operations are to take place or taking place. So
But
that
it's a
kind
very
of
difficult place because as you pointed out, you have the private armed groups. You have sometimes members of the police or military are corrupt or in the payroll of some of these. In a situation like that, let's not even talk about Holo yet.
it's
but
more complicated.
yes. So how do you talk about that in the panel?
Well, it's on a case-to-case, not on the panel, but on the ground,
On the
through our
ground.
ceasefire committee on
So
a
you take it
case-to-case basis.
Really? Okay.
If there's a law enforcement operation that's going to be done, for instance, against a member of a private armed group or
see.
even an international terrorist organization,
Yes.
there are efforts to make sure that this does not create any spillover in MILF communities that can lead to actual hostilities between government forces, whether police or the AFP.
Trying to contain it.
Yes.
What about the allegations of ceasefire violations? It's on both sides, but most recent you have 4 MILF members arrested in Sultan Kudarat and in Lanao.
Right.
What about situations like that?
Well, there are also procedures for that in the sense that, yes, to file a complaint will be one of these, and that's why we've also done our internal review of the arrests that had taken place. We have made sure that the prisoners' rights have not been violated, and that's we have at least found from our own internal investigation of that due process were observed. But since in the 3 cases, 3 of 4 cases, these were actually covered by arrest warrants or
Yes.
warrants of search warrants,
Yes.
which led to the arrest. Then it's really the law taking place, the legal procedures now kicking in.
So that's
to
considered
address these problems.
A criminal. What about, this is a question from @RichPhilJ from Twitter. He's asking, what about unreported crimes involving local politicians in Mindanao? Are they included? Do you tackle them in the peace talks?
No, there should be the regular government system that should be able to address this.
So this is really the context for the peace talks. What he's talking about. I think this might also lead to
let's
the
not
private
forget-
armed groups and.
But yes, let's not forget that there is still a government there.
Yes.
Of course, there's still the arm there, and it's under reformist leadership now. I'm very
Yes.
happy to find out that Governor Mujiba Taman has appointed a woman to serve as his executive secretary, somebody who has been involved in the human rights advocacy, the former chair, in fact, the first chair chair, in fact, of the Regional Human Rights Commission. So these things should be addressed through the governance institutions that remain in place.
So how would you describe, as the peace talks are going, how would you describe life in these areas that are affected by the Bangsamoro Agreement today for the people?
We've had really relative peace in these communities. People have been able to go back to school. The children have been able to go back to school since the end of the, following the Maguindanao massacre and the institution of this state of emergency, and then going through that OIC government and all that. I think most of the atrocities that were going on during that time
Yes.
have largely been put to stop. And if there are some activities of former private armed groups associated with that political leadership in the past, it's something that is not tolerated anymore.
Yes.
So you can see really that there has been a much improved situation for people on the ground. The fact that what you have now is a regional government that is more accountable and in fact very conscious of the fact that we have to observe human rights.
Fantastic.
And good governance in the conduct of public administration.
Do you see any impact, like in terms of people's lives right now? Is there increasing confidence? Are there increased investments coming in? Do you see change on the ground now?
There are a lot of people who are very interested to come in and contribute to the development, especially after we have completed the process of signing the agreement. And that's certainly another impetus, both for government and for the MILF, to make sure that we don't fail in this task, that this actually happen as soon as it's possible, really, to agree on all the details that will have to be put in place. It's not, certainly it's not very easy, and there are a lot of technical and legal and political considerations for each and every word that we put in the annex. It must, as we've always said, it must stand the scrutiny of the skeptics, and must be able to get that kind of broad support that is very necessary for the success of any political process such as this one. So development, we are certain, ODA, they will come in as soon as we put the infrastructures in place.
Tell me what the process will look like now. Your best and worst case scenario, and then what's the timeline?
Timeline is up to 2016, which is that you have the first elections, regular elections for the assembly that will constitute the Bangsamoro government. But before that, the challenge is to pass the law.
Yes.
First, for the Transition Commission to be able to draft the basic law, the draft basic law that will be submitted to Congress.
You will have, right?
Yes, following the guidelines, but certainly putting in a lot more details than what you will find in the annexes once these are signed. No, for instance, we do have a provision in the framework agreement that says that the Bangsamoro shall have a ministerial form of government, but there's nothing else in the annex that describes the specific features, the kind of representation that will be put in place in the Bangsamoro Assembly, the system of representation, which we hope will be certainly more representative of the different sectors and constituencies, much more representative than what we have in the Senate or in the Congress. It's a very good opportunity to show that the representation can certainly be much better than what we have seen so far, not only in the region but in the rest of the country.
That's a lot to do between now and 2016, which is implementation of it. How optimistic are you that A, the law will be written, and 2, that it will be passed?
The president, once the president puts his finger on this, it's something that he will commit himself and the resources of government and also his own political capital to see through. And we're very hopeful that the Senate and the lower house will be one with us on this track. And I think by all indications they are. I mean, everybody wants this peace to happen. Everybody will be benefit from this and will be part of this historical resolution of something that has confounded our nation. since we became an independent republic, and maybe even before, even long before we actually became independent, that this thing has been with us, and this is the chance to find that kind of resolution. So everybody, I'm sure, would want to be on board when this happens, and we count on that kind of desire, a shared aspiration among all of us. Let's have this peace, and please be with us.
Peace be with us, and please be with us. That's really good. That's really good. Well,
Right.
well, it's 4 days. You're leading the government panel, and you've just given us, the way you look at the time. It's fantastic. You've just back timed it. It's a lot to do. When this agreement was first signed 8 months ago, everyone lauded it as historic, and now everybody also said the devil is in the details. I guess, how do you feel going in? What things would you not want to see happen, and what can we do to help? I know that's a lot in one.
That's right.
I'll just elicit your final thoughts because we're running out of time. But in all those things,
We know that we joke that this is a process where you have to open many doors, and as soon as you open one door, there are so many other doors that you have to open, and you have to make sure each time that you're opening the right door. And that means that every step of the way, there will be a lot of challenges. But if we get the mechanisms in place, if we get the processes clear from the very beginning, and that's what we're trying to do. And that's why it's also important for us that we design the whole thing very well in the kinds of monitoring systems that we'll be putting in place, the bodies that will implement the different components. The Transition Commission, of course, is very important in really going through that kind of process of putting the agreement into legal form.
yes.
And putting in all the details that are not there yet, and making sure that everything falls in place and will be supported, will pass the test of constitutionality,
Yes.
and also address the different sensitivities and concerns of all the different stakeholders. So these are the big challenges ahead.
I know your predecessor, Marvic Leonin, was very conscious of not repeating the mistakes of the 2008 MOA, which is leaving the people on the ground out of it. Do you have to still worry about that, or are you?
Yes, consultations, public involvement in the many aspects are very important every step of the way, and that's our guarantee that this will get that kind of wide public support.
Fantastic. Thank you so
thank
much,
you.
Miriam. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you
Good
very
luck in
Thank
Kuala
you.
Lumpur. We've been speaking with Miriam Ferrer, the chief government negotiator in the talks with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. The government and the MILF will resume peace talks in Kuala Lumpur on July 8, after negotiations stalled over disagreements on wealth and power sharing. Miriam is optimistic moving forward. Well wishes go with her. I'm Maria Ressa. Thanks for watching Talk Thursday.